Beneath the frost-laced veil of the eternal winter moon, a single heartbeat echoed like a forbidden prayer in the silence of the dying palace. Mira Solon huddled in the shadowed alcove of the grand hall, her breath forming fragile ghosts in the chill air that seeped through the stone walls of Valenhold. The castle loomed like a sentinel of ice and iron, its spires piercing the perpetual twilight of the northern realms, where snowdrifts piled against the battlements like the accumulated sorrows of 1,000 rejected souls. Wind howled through the arrow slits, carrying the distant uives of wolves that prowled the frozen forests beyond. Wild things unbound by the hierarchies that crushed her kind. She was an Omega, marked by the moon goddess, with a gentle spirit that the world mistook for weakness. Her presence barely tolerated in the royal court where alphas ruled with unyielding fists. Rejection had been her cradle and her curse. Born to a minor pack on the fringes of the kingdom, Mira had been cast out at 16 when her heat came unexpectedly, drawing scorn from those who saw Omegas as vessels for breeding, not bearers of destiny. Unworthy, they had whispered, banishing her to the outer villages where the cold gnawed at the bones and the hungry eyed the weak. She had survived by her hands, gathering herbs under the moon's pale gaze, mending the wounds of travelers with poultices that seemed to whisper secrets of the earth. But whispers of her quiet resilience reached the ears of the court, and in a moment of desperation, she had been summoned to Valenhold. Not as a healer, but as a servant, scrubbing floors and tending hearths, her Omega scent muffled by bitter herbs to avoid offending the noble alphas who strode the halls like gods of war. Now, the air in the great hall thickened with grief and the metallic tang of blood. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters across the tapestries depicting ancient battles. Alphas, triumphant under crimson moons, their fur matted with the lifeblood of foes. The physicians, robed in gray velvet, stained with the futile efforts of their craft, had gathered around the royal dais, their faces etched with defeat. King Idris Valen sat upon his throne of carved obsidian and wolf pelt, his broad frame unbowed yet hollowed by a guilt that gnawed deeper than any blade. His eyes, storm-gray and haunted, fixed on the two small forms before him, Princess Lyria and Prince Daemon, his heirs, his heart's fragile legacy. Lyria, barely 8 winters old, lay pale as fresh snow on a pallet of silken furs, her golden curls matted against her fevered brow. Her breaths came in shallow rasps, each one a thread fraying in the wind. Beside her Daemon, her twin and mirror in frailty, clutched a wooden carving of a wolf, his small fingers trembling as if to hold on to life itself. The sickness had come like a shadow from the cursed borders, a plague that twisted the blood and silenced the strong. Medicine failed. Magic, invoked by the court's seers, recoiled like flame from water. The moon goddess, it seemed, had turned her face away, leaving only the echo of prayers unanswered. Mira watched from her corner, her heart a storm of empathy she dared not unleash. She had seen the king's descent into this abyss, the man who once despised Omegas as dilutions of pure alpha blood, who had decreed their subjugation in laws etched in stone. Idris Valen was a warrior forged in the fires of border wars, his body scarred from battles where betrayal had cost him his first mate, leaving him a widower burdened by duty and remorse. Whispers in the servants' quarters spoke of his melancholy, how he wandered the ramparts at night, staring at the moon as if seeking absolution for the packs he had crushed in his rise to power. Yet here he was, broken not by enemies, but by the fragility of his own bloodline. The court prepared for mourning, black banners unfurled from the towers, and the high priests chanted dirges that mingled with the wind's lament. A silver pendant hung at Mira's throat, cool against her skin, a relic from her banished mother, etched with the crescent of the moon goddess and a single drop of what was said to be ancient blood, preserved in crystal. It had been her constant companion through exile, warming faintly in moments of quiet desperation, as if the divine watched still. She touched it now, fingers tracing its edges, feeling a subtle pulse like a distant heartbeat. The hall's chill seeped into her bones, but within her stirred something warmer, a lunar glow she had always hidden. Omegas were not meant for miracles. They were meant to serve, to submit. To step forward would invite scorn, perhaps death, another rejection in a life woven from them. Yet as Lyria's gasp tore through the silence, a small hand reaching toward her father with fading strength, Mira's resolve cracked like ice under spring's first thaw. The king's face, usually a mask of regal steel, crumpled. He leaned forward, his large hand enveloping Damon's, whispering promises the boy could no longer hear. The physicians bowed their heads, murmuring of inevitable nightfall. The court held its breath, the air heavy with the scent of smoldering herbs and unspoken fears. War loomed at the borders, and without heirs, the throne would fracture into rival claims, blood spilling anew under the indifferent moon. Mira rose slowly, her woolen skirts whispering against the flagstones. Fear coiled in her gut like a serpent, cold and insistent, but beneath it burned a curiosity, a pull toward the suffering that mirrored her own hidden wounds. She had been left to die once, in the snows of her exile, saved only by the faint light of this pendant guiding her to shelter. What was one more risk when the children teetered on the edge? The wind outside rattled the windows, as if the goddess herself urged her onward. Trembling, Mira stepped from the shadows, her bare feet silent on the cold stone, drawn inexorably toward the dais where destiny waited, veiled in moonlight and mystery. The king's gaze lifted as Mira approached the dais, his storm-gray eyes sharpening like a blade drawn from frost. She felt the weight of it, that piercing scrutiny, as if he could unravel the threads of her hidden self with a single glance. The hall's murmurs hushed, the courtiers shifting like shadows under the torchlight, their scents, a mix of polished leather, incense, and underlying fear, thickening the air. Mira's pulse thrummed in her ears, louder than the wind's distant howl, her fingers brushing the silver pendant at her throat. It warmed against her skin, the crystal drop of ancient blood within it pulsing faintly, like a secret heartbeat urging her forward. She knelt before the royal pallet, the stone floor biting into her knees through her threadbare skirts. Up close, the children's frailty was a visceral ache. Lyria's lips parted in silent pleas, her small chest rising and falling in erratic whispers, while Damon's fingers still clutched that carved wolf, its wooden eyes staring blankly at the vaulted ceiling. The physicians hovered at the edges, their faces masks of resignation, one muttering about the plague's unyielding grip, a curse born from the shadowed borders where rival packs waged war with poisoned arrows and whispered hexes. Idris Valen leaned forward, his presence a mountain of restrained power, broad shoulders clad in a cloak of dark fur that carried the faint musk of pine and bloodied earth. Scars etched his jawline, remnants of battles where he had clawed victory from betrayal, yet now they seemed to deepen with the lines of despair. He had despised Omegas like her, decreed them unfit for the court's inner circles, their sense a distraction to the disciplined fury of alphas. They weaken the bloodline, he had proclaimed in edicts that echoed through the packs, born from the loss of his mate, torn from him in a raid that left him questioning the moon goddess's mercy. But in this moment, as Mira's hand hovered near Lyria's fevered brow, something flickered in his eyes, not recognition, but a raw curiosity laced with suspicion. "Do not touch them," he growled, his voice low and gravel-rough, like stones grinding under a glacier. The command rippled through the hall, courtiers drawing breath, but Mira did not withdraw. Fear coiled in her belly, cold as the snows of her exile, yet beneath it stirred an instinctive pull, as if the pendant's glow called to the hidden fractures in his soul. She had been left to die once, abandoned in the white wastes where the wind stripped flesh from bone, her pack's rejection a wound that never fully scarred. These children, innocent in their suffering, mirrored that abandonment, and she could no more turn away than deny the moon's tide. With trembling resolve, Mira extended her hand, her palm brushing Lyria's clammy forehead. The contact was electric, a surge of moonlit warmth flooding from her core, channeled through the pendant's crystal. It bloomed like silver fire in her veins, unseen but felt. A gentle heat that chased the plague's chill, easing the girl's ragged breaths into something steadier, deeper. Lyria's eyelids fluttered, a soft sigh escaping her lips, color seeping back into her cheeks like dawn piercing the night. Gasps echoed from the physicians, their instruments forgotten as they leaned in, disbelief etching their features. Idris's hand shot out, gripping Mira's wrist, not harshly, but with the unyielding strength of an alpha anchoring his world. His touch was fire and ice, calloused fingers rough from the hilt of swords, yet his grip held a tremor, a vulnerability he could not mask. Their eyes met, and in that instant, the connection ignited, instinctive and denied, born from the fear knotting her chest and the curiosity widening his gaze. Her omega essence, usually subdued, brushed against his alpha aura like mist over embers, stirring scents of wild herbs and lunar dew that made him tense. He inhaled sharply, the hall's chill forgotten, as if her presence unraveled the walls he had built around his guilt. "What sorcery is this?" he demanded, his voice a rumble that vibrated through her bones, but there was no accusation in it, only a haunted wonder. Mira's heart raced, the pendant now burning hot against her skin, its drop of blood seeming to throb in rhythm with the children's reviving pulses. She had hidden this gift her whole life, a whisper from the goddess that omegas like her carried paths to healing, not just submission. To reveal it now, before this king who embodied the hierarchies that had crushed her, was to invite exile anew, or worse. The courtiers stirred, whispers rising like smoke. An omega. Healing the heirs? Idris released her wrist slowly, his fingers lingering a fraction too long, tracing the faint scars on her arm from her days in the wilds. Damon stirred beside his sister, his small hand unclenching from the wolf carving, a faint whimper turning to a murmur. The king's face, etched with the weight of lost battles and unspoken remorse, softened imperceptibly, guilt flickering like torchlight on water. He had led wars that orphaned packs, crushed rivals under the banner of duty. Yet here, in the face of this quiet miracle, his ethical core, melancholic, burdened, warred with the instinct to reject what challenged his world. Mira pulled back, her hands trembling, the warmth receding like a tide, leaving her chilled and exposed. The hall buzzed with tension, the wind outside battering the walls as if the goddess herself bore witness. Idris rose, towering over her, his shadow enveloping her form. But in his eyes lingered that denied spark, a curiosity that mirrored her own fear, weaving the first threads of an unspoken bond. The plague's shadow lingered, but for the first time, hope's fragile light pierced the frost, demanding they confront what the moon had woven between them. Yet, as the children slept peacefully, their breaths steady under the flickering torches, Mira felt the pull of caution, the rationalization of her heart. This was no fairy tale of instant salvation, but a dangerous dance with power and pain. The king watched her retreat to the shadows, his gaze a weight she carried like the pendant's secret, knowing the encounter had only begun to unearth the wounds they both bore. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The night deepened over Valenholt, the moon's silver gaze filtering through the narrow windows like a watchful sentinel, casting elongated shadows that twisted across the stone floors. Mira slipped back into the alcove's embrace, her body still humming from the warmth that had surged through her veins. leaving her limbs heavy and her mind adrift in a sea of unspoken questions. The pendant at her throat cooled slowly, its crystal drop of ancient blood now a quiet ember against her skin, as if sated by the miracle it had unleashed. She pressed her back against the cold wall, the chill seeping through her woolen dress like fingers of doubt, reminding her of the exiles that had shaped her, nights spent huddled in snow-swept caves where the wind's howl mocked her solitude. The hall stirred with a fragile hope, the courtiers' whispers rising like mist from thawing earth. But beneath it all lingered the scent of fear, sharp and metallic, mingling with the smoldering herbs the physicians scattered anew. Lyria and Damon slept now, their small chests rising in steady rhythm, color blooming in their cheeks like the first fragile flowers under winter's retreat. Yet Mira felt no triumph, only a tremor of exposure, her gift laid bare before eyes that could turn it to chains. She had rationalized it in the shadows of her mind, a fleeting impulse born of empathy for the abandoned, nothing more. To linger would invite the king's scrutiny, deeper than the blade scars on his jaw, and she had learned long ago that Omegas like her were not saviors, but sacrifices. Idris Valen remained on the dais, his throne a silhouette of unyielding strength, yet his posture betrayed the fracture within. He dismissed the physicians with a curt wave, their footsteps echoing like retreating thunder as they gathered their failed instruments and vanished into the corridors. The king's gaze, storm-gray and unrelenting, followed Mira's retreat, a weight that pulled at her like the tide she could not deny. Guilt etched his features, deeper than the remorse for wars waged in duty's name, for the pacts he had shattered to forge his realm. He had despised Omegas as harbingers of weakness, their sense a siren call that distracted from the iron will required to rule. But this one, her touch a lunar fire that breathed life into his dying bloodline, stirred something ethical and raw, a melancholy curiosity that warred with his rational barriers. She was no threat, yet her presence unraveled the walls he had built around his heart's hidden wounds. A sudden clamor shattered the fragile peace. The heavy doors of the great hall burst open, admitting a gust of icy wind laced with the acrid bite of smoke and blood. Scouts from the border patrols stumbled in, their fur cloaks torn and matted with crimson, faces gaunt under helmets dented by recent fury. "My king," the lead warrior gasped, dropping to one knee, his voice ragged as the howls that pursued him from the night. The shadow packs strike, rival alphas from the eastern crags, poisoned by the plague's curse. They breach the outer walls, chanting of your heirs' fall as omen. Assassins slip through the snow, blades dipped in the same venom that felled the young ones. The hall erupted in chaos, courtiers scattering like leaves in a gale, their cries mingling with the distant clash of steel from the battlements. Torches sputtered in the draught, flames leaping wildly to illuminate the intruder's intent. Not mere raiders, but agents of political betrayal, emboldened by whispers of the throne's vulnerability. Idris rose like a tempest, his roar cutting through the din, a primal alpha command that straightened spines and stilled hearts. To arms, protect the heirs at all costs. His hand instinctively reached for the sword at his belt, its hilt worn smooth by years of bloodied justice, but his eyes flicked to the alcove, to Mira, as if she were now woven into the peril. Mira's breath caught, the pendant warming once more, an insistent pulse that urged her not to flee. The common enemy crystallized in that moment, the plague's shadow manifesting in flesh and fury, a threat that bound their fates like threads of moonlight on snow. She could slip away, vanish into the servants' warrens as she had in her exile, rationalizing survival over involvement. But the children's soft breaths echoed in her mind. Fragile as the wind's whisper, and the king's haunted gaze held a plea unspoken. Empathy bloomed unbidden, a tender ache amid the encroaching terror, transforming fear into a reluctant tether. As arrows whistled through the windows, shattering glass in a rain of shards, Idris vaulted from the dais, his cloak billowing like raven wings. He reached the alcove in strides that shook the stone, his large frame shielding her from the fray. "Stay behind me," he commanded, voice low and gravel rough, not with the disdain of old decrees, but a protective rumble born of necessity. Up close, his scent enveloped her. Pine forests after rain, edged with the copper tang of old battles, stirring her omega instincts despite the barriers she erected. She nodded, heart pounding like war drums, her hand brushing his arm in the press of bodies. The contact sparked again, not the healing surge, but a deeper warmth, empathetic and visceral, as if their wounds recognized kin. They moved as one through the hall's turmoil, Idris's sword cleaving the air to fell an assassin who lunged from the shadows, blood spraying in an arc that caught the torchlight like rubies under the moon. Mira pressed close, her senses alive to the chaos, the metallic reek of spilled life, the crunch of boots on frost-kissed stone, the children's palate now guarded by loyal retainers. A blade whistled toward them, and without thought, Mira's hand shot out, the pendant flaring as she deflected it, not with strength, but a subtle push of lunar energy that sent the attacker staggering. Idris glanced at her, eyes widening in that denied wonder, the bond forging in the heat of shared peril. "You fight with light," he murmured, parrying another strike, his free hand steadying her waist, a touch that lingered, rationalized as mere balance, but felt as something profound. The skirmish raged, eaves from the walls joining the fray like the goddess's own chorus. But in the refugio of his shadow, Mira felt the shift, empathy weaving into vinculo, her resistance cracking under the weight of his melancholy resolve. He was no longer the king who had scorned her kind, but a man marked by guilt, choosing protection over pride. The wind howled approval, carrying the scent of snow and distant fires as they fought back to back. The pendant's blood drop throbbing like a shared heartbeat. Yet doubt lingered in her core. This alliance, born of necessity, could shatter under the moon's revealing light, demanding they confront the power of what stirred between them. As the last assassin fell, the hall fell silent, save for the crackle of dying torches and the labored breaths of the victorious. Idris turned to her, his face streaked with sweat and blood, eyes searching hers in the lunar glow. The bond hummed, unspoken and resisted, a fragile refugio against the storms yet to come. The moon hung low over Valenhold, its silver light bleeding through the fractured windows like veins of quicksilver, illuminating the carnage strewn across the great hall. Shards of glass glittered on the flagstones amid pools of blood that steamed faintly in the chill, the metallic scent mingling with the acrid smoke of dying torches. Mira stood amidst the aftermath, her chest heaving, the silver pendant at her throat throbbing with a heat that seeped into her skin like a lover's whispered promise. Her hands trembled, not from the skirmish's fury, but from the lunar energy that had surged unbidden, deflecting that assassin's blade with an invisible force, a manifestation deeper than the healing touch she had given the children. She had felt it coil within her, ancient and insistent, drawing from the crystal drop of blood embedded in the pendant, as if the moon goddess herself had lent her breath to the fray. Idris Valen sheathed his sword with a rasp that echoed like a sigh, his broad frame turning fully toward her. Blood streaked his face, tracing the scars along his jaw in crimson rivulets, but his storm-gray eyes burned with an intensity that stripped away the shadows of doubt. He stepped closer, the air between them thickening with the musk of exertion and something more primal, the instinctive pull of alpha to omega, resisted yet undeniable. "You wield light as a weapon," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stone, carrying the weight of his melancholy. Guilt shadowed his features, etched deeper by the night's revelations, the plague's venom in the assassin's blades, whispers of betrayal from rival packs who saw his heir's frailty as divine judgment on his rule. He had crushed such threats before, in wars that left fields white with bones under crimson moons. But this peril felt personal, a mirror to the remorse that haunted his nights. Mira met his gaze, her heart a tempest of fear and curiosity, the pendant's pulse syncing with her own. She had always hidden this gift, rationalizing it as a fleeting warmth from her mother's relic, born of exile's desperation rather than divine favor. Omegas were not warriors or seers. They were the quiet bearers of packs, their strengths whispered away in the wind. Yet tonight, as the bond forged in refuge deepened, the power stirred anew, demanding acknowledgement. The children's pallet lay secure in the corner, Lyria and Damon stirring faintly under the guard's watch, their revived breaths a fragile anchor amid the chaos. But the hall's silence pressed in, broken only by the distant uives of wolves echoing the wind's lament, as if the northern wilds mourned the fractures yet to come. Idris reached out, his calloused fingers brushing the pendant at her throat, the contact sending a jolt through her, a spark of moonlit fire that made her gasp. The crystal drop glowed faintly under his touch, illuminating the etched crescent within, and in that moment, visions flickered at the edges of her mind. Not memories, but revelations, fragments of the goddess's weave. She saw ancient bloodlines entwined under lunar skies, Omegas like her as pathfinders, bearers of hidden light to heal the wounds of kings and mend the realms torn by war. The pendant was no mere heirloom. It was a key, forged in the fires of forgotten rituals, its blood drop a seal of destiny, binding the rejected to the broken. "You are no ordinary Omega," Idris murmured, his hand lingering. The ethical core of him, melancholic, duty-bound, warring with the instinct to pull away. He had rejected her kind in edicts carved from his own grief after his mate's death in a raid that reeked of treachery, vowing to purify the bloodline through strength alone. But here, in the gore-streaked hall, her gift unraveled that vow, revealing her as the thread to his fate. The plague was no random curse. Scouts' reports confirmed it, a hex woven by Eastern rivals, aimed at his heirs to shatter the throne. And Mira's touch had not only revived them, but repelled the venom's echo in the assassins, her light a counter to the shadows encroaching on his realm. Tears pricked Mira's eyes, the wind rattling the banners overhead like spectral wings, carrying the chill scent of impending snow. The revelation crashed over her, visceral and raw. Her exile had not been punishment, but preparation, the moon goddess guiding her from frozen fringes to this pivotal hearth. Yet acceptance came laced with terror. The power demanded sacrifice, a choice between her hidden life and the spotlight of destiny, where love might redeem but also destroy. "This gift, it comes from the blood within," she whispered, her voice trembling like leaves in a gale, fingers closing over his on the pendant. Warmth flooded her palm, healing the shallow cut on his knuckles from the fight, the skin knitting seamlessly under lunar glow. He inhaled sharply, the pain fading, but in its place bloomed a deeper ache, the guilt of his past decrees, now illuminated as barriers against his own vulnerability. Idris's face softened, the lines of his remorse deepening under the moon's gaze, as realization dawned. She was the key, placed in his path not for submission, but to forge redemption from rejection. The goddess had woven their wounds together, the king's shattered legacy, her banished spirit, demanding he choose compassion over power, faith over the despair that had armored his heart. "The stars aligned for this," he said, voice husky with wonder, pulling her gently into the shelter of his shadow as guards cleared the fallen. Their scents mingled, her lunar herbs and dew-kissed earth against his pine and iron, stirring the resisted bond into something profound, a spiritual tether under the eternal winter sky. But as the hall emptied, the weight of what lay ahead settled like frost on her soul. The revelation bound them, yet the court's eyes would turn, rivals would strike harder, and her gift might demand a price in blood or freedom. The pendant cooled against her skin, a silent witness to the dilemma etching her heart. What was destiny if not the mercy to heal what power alone could not? The wind howled a question into the night, unanswered, as the moon watched their fragile awakening. Comment, Luna, if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The frost-laden dawn crept over Valenhold like a reluctant confessor, its pale light seeping through the arrow slits to gild the blood-stained hall in hues of silver and ash. Mira stood at the edge of the great chamber, her fingers tracing the silver pendant's crescent etchings, the crystal drop within now a cool weight against her chest, as if the ancient blood slumbered after its revelations. The air hung heavy with the scent of charred wood and lingering iron, remnants of the night's skirmish where assassins' bodies had been dragged to the outer pyres, their flames crackling under the moon's watchful eye. She felt the pull of it all, a visceral ache in her core, the lunar gift that had bloomed in her veins demanding more than hiding, more than the quiet empathy that had once sustained her exile. Idris Valen paced the dais, his cloak of dark fur swirling like storm clouds, the scars on his hands catching the faint glow as he clenched his fists. The children slept in a guarded alcove now, their breath steady but fragile, a testament to her touch that the court could no longer ignore. Whispers had spread through the corridors like wildfire on dry tinder. The Omega who wielded moonlight, who had repelled death's shadow from the heirs. Yet in the king's storm-gray eyes lingered the melancholy of a man confronting his past, the guilt that had armored him now cracking under the weight of what she represented. He had built his throne on the subjugation of her kind, decrees born from the betrayal that stole his mate. A rival Alpha's poisoned blade in the night, leaving him to rule with an iron heart, scorning Omegas as echoes of that vulnerability. The heavy doors groaned open once more, admitting a procession that chilled the air sharper than the wind's bite. At its head strode Lord Cale Thorne, the king's once trusted advisor, his frame lean and shadowed under a mantle of raven feathers, eyes like chips of obsidian glinting with feigned loyalty. Flanking him were envoys from the eastern crags, rival alphas, their pelts matted with travel's grime, scents thick with the musk of ambition and the faint sickly tang of the plague's curse. The lead among them, Alpha Rorik Voss, towered with a predator's grace, his fur cloak adorned with bones of fallen foes, a sneer curling his lips as he surveyed the hall. Betrayal hung in the air like unspoken venom. Scouts had confirmed it in the dead of night. The plague's hex traced back to Thorne's hidden missives, a political gambit to weaken Idris and claim the throne through the heir's fall. "You summon us to parley, Valen?" Rorik's voice boomed, gravel rough and laced with mockery, echoing off the vaulted ceilings where tapestries of ancient wars fluttered in the draft. "While your bloodline withers and shadows creep from our borders, the moon goddess favors the strong. Your Omegas and half-measures have invited this judgment." His gaze slid to Mira, predatory and dismissive, igniting a fire in her chest that warred with the fear coiling like frost in her veins. She stood unmoving, the pendant warming faintly, its pulse a reminder of the light she carried, born not of submission, but of the goddess's quiet rebellion. Idris halted his pacing, his broad shoulders squaring as he descended the dais, the sword at his hip, a silent promise of bloodied retribution. "Judgment?" he growled, the word a low thunder that stilled the courtiers huddled in the shadows. Guilt flickered across his features, raw and unmasked, the ethical king who had waged wars to protect his realm, only to see treachery fester within its heart. Thorne stepped forward, his face a mask of contrition, but Mira sensed the lie in his scent, sharp as deceitful thorns. "My liege," the advisor murmured, voice oily as spilled oil on snow, "the envoys bring terms. Yield the borders or the plague spreads. Your heir's survival is precarious, and Omega's parlor tricks cannot stem the tide." The hall tensed, breaths held like fragile prayers, the distant howl of wolves weaving through the wind as if the wilds themselves bore witness. Mira's heart pounded, a visceral drumbeat syncing with the pendant's throb, visions from the revelation resurfacing, paths of blood and moonlight, where forgiveness mended what war tore asunder. She had been rejected by her own pack for this gift, left to the snows where death's embrace nearly claimed her, rationalizing survival as freedom from chains. Yet here, faced with the court's piercing stares, alphas who echoed her past scorn, omegas who averted their eyes in shared shame, the choice loomed, moral and searing. Step into the light as healer and symbol, binding her fate to Idris's in love's redemptive forge, or retreat to liberty's cold solitude, letting war claim its toll. Idris's gaze found hers amid the throng, a silent anchor in the storm, his melancholy deepening the lines of his face. He had resisted this pull, rationalizing her presence as a fleeting anomaly, a distraction from duty's blade. But the bond, forged in refuge and revelation, hummed now like lunar tide, urging him toward compassion over conquest. "Enough," he commanded, voice steady, yet laced with the remorse of a man who had crushed packs in his rise, only to see his own legacy poisoned by the same ambition. He turned to Rorik, eyes blazing. "Your hex ends here. Thorn, your treachery stains these stones. Confess, or face the goddess's true judgment." Thorn's facade shattered, a snarl twisting his lips as he lunged, a hidden dagger gleaming with plague-laced venom. Chaos erupted, guards clashing with envoys, steel singing against steel, blood spraying in arcs that caught the dawn's light like crimson stars. Mira moved without thought, the pendant flaring hot as she intercepted a blade aimed at Lyria's alcove, her hand channeling moonlight to shatter the assassin's resolve, sending him crumpling to the floor. The power coursed through her, painful and profound, the ancient blood drop pulsing with the weight of choice. Freedom meant fleeing this fray, preserving her hidden self. But love demanded she stand, healing the fractures of king and court, forgiving the hierarchies that had wounded her. Idris fought like a tempest, his sword felling Thorn in a spray of blood that pooled dark on the flagstones, the traitor's gasp of final betrayal under the moon's fading gaze. Rorik pressed forward, roaring a challenge, but Idris parried, their clash a whirlwind of fur and fury, the air thick with the reek of sweat and spilled life. Mira reached them, her touch grazing Idris's arm mid-strike, a surge of lunar warmth steadying his faltering guard, mending a venom graze that burned his flesh. He glanced at her, eyes wide with that resisted wonder, the ethical core of him choosing in that instant. Not war's endless cycle, but the mercy her light offered, a path to redemption over the throne's isolation. Rorik fell back, wounded and snarling, his envoys retreating into the snow-swept dawn as horns blared from the battlements. The hall fell to heavy silence, broken only by the wind's mournful sigh and the crackle of fresh torches kindled against the chill. Idris turned to Mira, bloodied and breathless, his hand cupping her face with a tenderness born of pain's forge. "You chose this," he whispered, voice husky with guilt's release, the bond no longer denied but embraced in the dilemma's fire. What was strength if not the freedom to forgive, the love to heal amid war's ruins? Yet as the court watched, murmurs rising like mist, Mira felt the spiritual weight settle. Her liberty hung by a thread, the goddess demanding sacrifice for the Renascimento to come, the pendant's blood a seal on choices yet unmade. The dawn wind howled a question into the frost, unanswered, as blood and moonlight mingled on the stone, binding wounds in a tragic weave of destiny and doubt. The silver pendant hung heavy against Mira's chest, its crystal drop of ancient blood now slick with the chill of dawn, as if it had absorbed the spilled lives staining the hall's stones. The air reeked of iron and frost, the wind slicing through the shattered windows like accusations from the retreating shadows. Idris's hand lingered on her face, his touch an anchor amid the court's stunned silence, but Mira felt the tremor in his fingers, the ethical king unraveling, his melancholy gaze searching hers for absolution he had long denied himself. Blood from Thorn's fall pooled at their feet, dark and viscous, mingling with the snow-dusted flagstones, a visceral reminder that betrayal's roots ran deeper than the crags from which Rorik had fled. The envoy's retreat had brought no peace. Horns blared from the battlements, echoing the wolves' distant chorus, signaling that the rival Alpha's forces gathered beyond the walls, their howls a war cry laced with the plague's curse. Courtiers emerged from hiding, their faces pale masks of fear and awe, scents of sweat and incense thickening the air like a shroud. Mira's heart pounded, a raw drumbeat syncing with the pendant's faint pulse as visions from the revelation resurfaced. Fractured packs under crimson moons, kings fallen to ambition's blade, omegas rising not in submission, but as beacons of mercy. Her exile flashed before her, the pack that had cast her out, whispering of her tainted gift as weakness, leaving her to the snows where she had nearly surrendered to the cold's embrace. Now, that past converged with Idris's, demanding a reckoning. Idris pulled away slowly, his broad frame turning to face the assembled court, the weight of his cloak dragging like chains of remorse. "The traitor lies dead," he declared, voice gravel rough and resonant, cutting through the murmurs like a sword through frost. But the shadow of his deceit lingers. Rorik Voss and his crag packs strike not from honor, but from the venom I once sowed in my own wars. His words hung heavy, the admission a crack in the armor of the Alpha who had crushed rival Matilhas to forge his throne, leaving orphans in the white wastes and scars on his soul. Guilt etched his features deeper, the lines around his storm-gray eyes speaking of nights haunted by his first mate's dying breath. Her blood on his hands from a raid he could have prevented through mercy rather than might. From the throng stepped Elder Thorn, a grizzled beta from Mira's old fringe pack, summoned as witness in the night's chaos, his fur-lined robes threadbare from years of border exile. His eyes, faded like winter skies, fixed on her with a mix of recognition and scorn, the scent of pine resin and old grudges wafting from him. "She was banished for this very light," he rasped, pointing a gnarled finger at Mira, the hall's chill amplifying his words into a dirge. "An omega who defies the natural order, drawing power from trinkets and whispers. My pack suffered raids after her departure. Rorik's blades found us weak, blaming her curse. And you, King Valen. Your decrees echoed ours, scorning her kind as the root of frailty. Now she stands at your side, weaving spells that mock the goddess's hierarchy." The accusation rippled outward, courtiers nodding, their whispers rising like steam from thawing earth, echoes of the hierarchies that had bound Mira in chains of rejection and Idris in isolation. She felt the pendant burn against her skin, the ancient blood drop, throbbing with insistent warmth, urging her to speak, to confront the past that clawed at her freedom. Love or liberty? The choice loomed, moral and searing, as visceral as the wind's bite on her exposed neck. To embrace this bond with Idris meant forgiving the king who embodied her world's cruelty, healing his fractured realm at the cost of her hidden self. To flee, reclaiming the wild solitude of exile, would doom the children to the plague's return, and the throne to war's endless cycle. Idris's gaze flicked to her, haunted and pleading, the melancholy Alpha who had rationalized his scorn as duty, now facing its mirror. "I forged laws from pain," he admitted, voice low but carrying to every corner, the torchlight flickering across his scarred jaw like lunar judgment. "After Alara's death, poisoned by a rival's treachery I failed to foresee, I vowed strength through purity, banishing what I feared would weaken us. Omegas like you, Mira, became symbols of that fear, but the goddess reveals truth in blood and moonlight." He gestured to the pendant, his hand brushing hers in a touch that sparked empathy's fire, warm and undeniable. The court gasped, the air thickening with the scent of pine from his cloak and the herbal dew of her essence, their scents entwining like fates woven under the eternal winter sky. Rorik's challenge came then, Not in silence, but thunder. A messenger burst through the doors, snow-caked and bloodied, bearing a gauntlet of twisted iron hurled from the borders. "Voss demands trial by combat," the scout gasped, collapsing to his knees. "For the throne, the heirs, and the Omega's witchery. Yield her, or face the packs united against your tainted rule." The hall erupted, alphas snarling, Omegas shrinking back, the wind howling through the cracks as if the goddess herself raged at the crossroads. Mira's breath caught, the pendant's pulse a frantic heartbeat, visions flooding her, forgiveness as a blade turned to plowshare, war as the grave of unborn peace. Her pack's rejection had been a wound, but Idris's guilt was a chasm, his choice to forgive his own past, to choose her light over conquest, could redeem them both or shatter the fragile bond in freedom's cold pursuit. She stepped forward, the stone cold under her bare feet, her voice steady despite the terror coiling in her gut. "The blood in this pendant is older than our feuds," she said, lifting it for all to see, the crystal glowing faintly in the dawn's pallor. "It binds the rejected to the broken, not for war, but for mercy's forge. I was left to die, as your packs left others, King Valen. Yet the goddess calls us to choose, cling to old wounds, or let love heal what power cannot." Her words wove through the tension, poetic and raw, the air humming with spiritual weight, the scent of blood and frost a language of dilemma, demanding they confront the ethical core, forgiveness as strength, or war as the coward's liberty. Idris nodded, his hand finding hers, calloused fingers interlacing with a resolve born of pain's long vigil. "Then we face the trial together," he murmured, the melancholy in his eyes yielding to a tragic light, the bond no longer resisted but a tether against the storm. Rorik's forces massed beyond the walls, the distant clash of steel heralding the confrontation. But in that shared gaze, Mira felt the moral precipice. Love's redemption demanded sacrifice, freedom's illusion, the blood of innocence. The moon's fading echo watched from the horizon, silent witness to the choice that would carve their souls, the pendant's ancient blood, a vow etched in moonlight and doubt. As the court armed for the fray, the wind carried weaves of judgment, unanswered, binding past and present in a tragic weave where mercy's whisper warred with war's roar. The gauntlet of twisted iron lay discarded on the bloodied flagstones, its jagged edges catching the pallid dawnlight like teeth bared in defiance. But Mira felt no chill from the encroaching war, only the insistent throb of the silver pendant against her skin, its crystal drop of ancient blood pulsing like a second heart, weaving her fate inexorably to the man beside her. The wind howled through Valenhold's breached walls, carrying the acrid bite of distant fires and the primal youths of assembling packs, a symphony of judgment that drowned the court's murmurs into a spectral hush. Snowflakes spiraled in from the storm-torn sky, dusting the crimson pools at their feet, turning betrayal's remnants into a fragile mosaic of white and red, as if the moon goddess sought to cloak the violence in her own veiled mercy. Idris's grip on her hand tightened, his calloused palm rough against her softer one, a union forged in the crucible of shared wounds that neither had sought. His storm-gray eyes, etched with the melancholy of a king who had bartered souls for a throne, held hers with a raw vulnerability that stripped away the barriers of rank and rejection. The scars along his jaw gleamed faintly in the torchlight, remnants of battles where he had chosen power over compassion, crushing fringe packs like hers in the name of unity, only to inherit a realm poisoned by the very isolation he imposed. Guilt radiated from him like heat from dying embers, the ethical core of him, duty-bound and remorseful, now laid bare, demanding a final reckoning. "We end this cycle," he murmured, his voice a gravel-low rumble that cut through the wind's lament, scented with pine and the faint copper of fresh resolve. "Not with blades, but with the light you carry, for the children, for us." Mira's breath caught, a visceral ache blooming in her chest as the pendant warmed, its ancient blood stirring visions that flooded her mind. Lunar temples shrouded in eternal winter, where omegas like her had once stood as pathfinders, their touches mending not just flesh, but the fractured bonds of alphas lost to war's shadow. Her exile replayed in fragments, the pack's scornful howls as they banished her to the snow-swept wilds. Her body racked by fever from the cold, saved only by this relic's faint glow guiding her to a hidden cave where herbs whispered secrets of healing. Rejection had been her forge, tempering a spirit the world deemed weak, yet now it called her to sacrifice, to pour her essence into the plague's heart, curing the realm at the cost of her own hidden freedom, binding her to Idris in a love that transcended hierarchies, redemptive and tragic. The children stirred in their guarded alcove, Lyria's small hand clutching the edge of her fur pallet, Damon's wooden wolf carving tumbling to the stone with a soft clatter that echoed like a plea. The plague lingered in their veins, a subtle shadow despite her earlier touch, its curse amplified by Rorik's hexes, demanding more than a fleeting miracle. Courtiers watched from the shadows, their sense a turbulent mix of fear sweat and incense. Alpha's snarling doubts while Omega's averted eyes heavy with echoed shame. Elder Thorn's accusation hung unresolved, his faded gaze boring into Mira like frostbite, reminding her of the moral precipice. Forgiveness meant embracing the king who embodied her world's cruelty, healing his bloodline and his soul through union, or clinging to liberty's illusion, fleeing into the storm where solitude promised no chains, but also no warmth. As Rorik's forces breached the outer gates, the clash of steel and roars rising like thunder from the battlements, Idris pulled her toward the dais, his free arm shielding her from the flurry of snow and arrows whistling through the air. Blood sprayed from a fallen guard, warm droplets spattering her skirts, the metallic tang mingling with the crisp bite of winter, grounding her in the sensory storm. The pendant burned now, a lunar fire channeling through her veins, illuminating the choice with spiritual clarity. War would claim the heirs, shatter the throne into rival fangs, perpetuating the cycles of betrayal that had orphaned her and widowed him. But love, resisted and rationalized through nights of doubt, offered renascimento, a cure woven from mercy, where her light could purge the plague from the land, at the price of her essence fading into his realm's light. They reached the children's side, the air thick with the children's shallow breaths and the flickering torch flames that danced like captive stars. Mira knelt, her knees sinking into the fur-strewn stone, the wind tugging at her hair like insistent fingers. Idris knelt beside her, his massive frame a bulwark against the encroaching chaos, his hand on her shoulder a tether of profound empathy. "What is strength?" she whispered, echoing the philosophy that had sustained her exiles, "if not choosing mercy over the blade?" Her voice trembled, poetic and raw, as she placed one hand on Lyria's fevered brow, the other on Damon's clammy palm, the pendant bridging them like a conduit of moonlight. The surge came then, visceral and all-consuming. Warmth flooded from her core, silver light unseen but felt, pulsing through the crystal's blood drop to chase the plague's venom like dawn dispersing fog. It tore at her, a searing ache that blurred her vision, her body weakening as the ancient power demanded its toll. Visions of her life force ebbing into the children's reviving pulses, mending not just their frailty, but the hex's roots, sending ripples outward to purify the shadowed borders. Lyria gasped, her golden curls framing eyes that fluttered open, clear and bright. Damon stirred, his small fingers curling around hers with newfound vigor. The wooden wolf forgotten as color flooded his cheeks. The hall's torches flared brighter, as if the goddess herself kindled them, the wind's howl softening to a reverent sigh, Ueves from the wilds joining in harmonious chorus. Idris's breath hitched, his hand cupping the back of her neck, pulling her against him as the light receded, leaving her limp and chilled, the pendant cooling to a quiet ember. The plague's shadow lifted, scouts bursting in moments later to report Rorik's forces faltering, their warriors collapsing as the hex unraveled, packs scattering into the snow like ghosts under the moon's revealing gaze. He had chosen union over isolation, his guilt transmuted in that embrace, forgiving his past decrees, embracing her as the redeemer the goddess had placed in his path, their sense entwining in a bond no longer denied. Lunar herbs and pine, blood and frost, a tragic harmony born of suffering's forge. Yet as strength ebbed from her limbs, Mira felt the sacrifice's whisper, the freedom of her hidden paths now woven into his throne, her light dimmed but eternal in the realm's healing. Idris lifted her gently, his lips brushing her temple in a kiss salted with tears, the court kneeling in awe as dawn broke fully, gilding the snow in gold. Renacimento bloomed in that moment, the children rising to cling to their father, the pack's howls turning to songs of unity, but Mira's heart held the ethical echo. What was redemption, if not the willing surrender of self for love's quiet crown? The moon faded westward, her work done, leaving them to the sun's uncertain warmth, bound in a destiny of cured wounds and chosen mercy. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.